Every night she screamed 5 times until the rancher finally did the unthinkable. The ranch had always been quiet after sunset. It was one of those places where the world seemed to slow down. Wide open fields stretched for miles, dotted with wooden fences and old barns that had stood for decades. The air smelled of earth, grass, and the faint sweetness of wildflowers that grew along the edges of the property. During the day, the ranch hummed with life. Horses neighed, cows moved slowly in the pastures, and the ranch hands went about their chores, moving with the rhythm of the land. But at night, everything changed. Nightfall brought a calm that was almost sacred, a silence so deep that even the tiniest sounds echoed across the fields. And then, without warning, the screaming began. It was not just once, not just a casual yell. It was 5 times, every single night. Sharp, piercing cries that cut through the quiet like a knife through cloth. The first scream would startle the rancher awake. Even with years of experience handling emergencies and sudden noises on the property, there was something different about these screams. They were filled with fear, with desperation, with a pain that could be felt even through the walls. The second scream would follow after a brief pause, like a warning that the first had not been enough. The third, fourth, and fifth screams would leave a chill in the air, making it impossible for anyone to ignore what was happening. The rancher would sit up in his bed, heart pounding, listening carefully. He could never tell what had triggered them, and no one else had the courage to check. She was the source of the screams. A young woman, quiet and polite during the day, who had come to the ranch to start a new chapter in her life. Some people in the small town nearby said she had left the city to escape a painful past. Others thought she was looking for peace, somewhere far from the chaos and noise of urban life. During the day, she worked calmly, feeding the animals, cleaning the barns, and helping with chores. She spoke when spoken to, smiled politely, and carried herself with a quiet dignity. She seemed gentle, unassuming, and entirely normal. But at night, she was a different person. The rancher first noticed the pattern after a few nights. It was always the same. Always 5 screams. Always at almost the exact same time. And always, no matter what he tried, he could hear them through the walls and across the fields. At first he tried to ignore it. Everyone had nightmares, didn't they? Everyone carried something heavy inside them. He told himself that it would pass, that she would adjust, that she just needed time to settle in. But the screams never stopped. In fact, they seemed to grow louder, sharper, more urgent with each passing night. He began to notice other things. The horses became restless as the night wore on, kicking at their stalls, refusing to settle. The dogs barked, but even they seemed uneasy, pacing back and forth with an alertness that was unusual for their normally calm routine. The wind seemed to pick up at the exact same moments as the screams, or perhaps it was the screams that made the wind feel colder, sharper. The rancher found himself lying awake, staring at the ceiling, listening. Sometimes he would go outside to look around, walking the quiet fields with only the moonlight to guide him. He would stop in the middle of the pasture, listening, trying to see if he could spot anything unusual. But there was nothing. Nothing except the sound of a woman screaming 5 times, each scream echoing in the vast emptiness. After a week, he could no longer pretend that it was normal. The first night, he thought it was just one bad dream. The second night, he hoped she was adjusting to her new surroundings. But by the 7th night, he was certain that something was wrong. And not just wrong in a small way, but deeply, profoundly wrong. There was a pain in those screams that was impossible to ignore. Something in her cries made the hair on the back of his neck stand up, made him feel that she was calling out not just for herself, but for help that no one could hear. He decided to speak with her one morning during breakfast. The sun had risen over the fields, casting long shadows from the barns and fences. The air smelled of hay and fresh coffee, a peaceful contrast to the chaos of the night before. He approached her cautiously, unsure of what to say. She looked up at him, her eyes tired but polite. He asked if she was sleeping well. She smiled gently and nodded, but there was a tremor in her hands as she held her coffee mug. He noticed the small details, the way her eyes darted to the floor, the slight shiver in her shoulders, the hesitation in her voice. She said she was fine. She said she was adjusting. She said it was nothing, but he knew better. That night, he stayed awake longer than usual. He did his usual rounds, checking the barns, feeding the animals, and making sure everything was secure. He waited for the first scream, listening, heart pounding. When it came, he froze. It was exactly as he had feared, sharp, urgent, full of pain. He stepped outside, the night cold and still. The moon shone over the fields, and the stars were scattered like tiny lights in a black sea. He followed the sound to the small guest house where she stayed. The air was heavy with tension. He could feel it pressing against his chest as he moved closer. Second scream. He hesitated at the door, unsure if he should knock. Third scream. The pain in the sound was undeniable. He could not walk away. Fourth scream. He raised his hand to knock, but something stopped him. He paused, listening, thinking, wondering if he would only make things worse. Fifth scream. Silence. He stepped back, unsure of what to do. He left the guest house without knocking, walking slowly back across the quiet fields. Something had changed that night. He could no longer pretend that it was normal. Ignoring it was not an option. The screams were not just noise. They were a call for help, a sign that someone needed him, and he had no choice but to respond. The following days were tense. The rancher found himself thinking about her constantly, wondering what had caused such pain, why she screamed every night, and how he could help. The ranch hands noticed his worry but did not question it. In that part of the world, people learned early to respect personal pain and to avoid asking questions that were too private. Still, whispers began to circulate among the staff. Some said the place was haunted. Others speculated that she had been through something terrible, something she could not share. Fear, curiosity, and concern mixed together, creating an invisible tension that hung over the ranch like a heavy fog. He knew he had to do something, but he did not know what. He could not simply confront her aggressively. He could not call for help without her consent. All he could do was watch, listen, and try to understand, and so he waited. Night after night, he listened to the screams, paying attention to every detail, the tone, the timing, the pauses. He noticed small changes, subtle differences that hinted at a deeper story, a story he could not yet hear in words but could feel in his heart. Each scream seemed to tell a part of her life, a piece of her pain. It was as if her soul was speaking directly to him through the darkness, asking for someone to notice, for someone to care. And the more he listened, the more he realized that she was not just a guest at his ranch. She was a person who had been carrying a heavy burden for a long time, a burden so heavy that it could not be left alone. The nights grew longer, the silence between the screams heavier. The rancher found himself pacing the floors of his house, staring out at the guest house, wondering if he could find a way to reach her without breaking her trust. He thought about the life she had left behind, the city she had escaped from, the reasons why she had come to the quiet fields of his ranch, and he realized that sometimes people cannot heal alone. Sometimes they need someone to stand beside them, even if all that person can do is listen and be present. The ranch had always been a place of hard work, patience, and respect for nature, but it had never been a place of quiet understanding like this, until now, until her screams began. And the rancher knew, deep in his heart, that his life, and the life of the young woman who had come seeking peace, was about to change forever, because the quiet after sunset would never be the same again. And the screams, 5 times every night, were only the beginning. After the first week of listening to the nightly screams, the rancher began noticing changes, not just in the woman, but in everyone around the ranch. The ranch hands started whispering among themselves, their voices low and careful, as if speaking too loudly might make the situation worse. Some believed the ranch was haunted. They told stories about the old barns creaking in the night, about shadows that moved just a little too quickly, about strange noises that could not be explained. Others suspected that the young woman was hiding something terrible, some secret she was unwilling or unable to share. Fear, once subtle, began spreading like wildfire, and the atmosphere of the ranch shifted. The rancher tried to maintain order and calm. He reminded the workers that it was important not to speculate or spread rumors. He emphasized that everyone needed to continue their duties and respect the privacy of the young woman. Yet, even with these reminders, the whispers could not be silenced. He noticed the nervous glances exchanged when they thought he wasn't looking, the way they paused their work when the time for the screams approached, as though bracing themselves for the inevitable. The tension was palpable, stretching across the ranch like an invisible rope, tying everyone to a growing unease. The rancher himself could not ignore the screams. Every night he found himself awake, waiting. Even when he tried to sleep, his mind would replay the sharp, urgent cries. He began taking careful notes in his mind, timing, pitch, pauses, and duration. He tried to find patterns, hoping that understanding the rhythm of the screams might help him understand the woman and her pain. Yet, despite all his observations, the reason behind the nightly terror remained a mystery. Each scream was raw and real, filled with a depth of emotion that no simple explanation could satisfy. One morning, he decided to speak to her again. Breakfast was quiet, the sunlight spilling across the wooden table, casting warm shadows on the floor. He approached her gently, aware that confrontation could make her feel trapped or fearful. He asked if she was sleeping well. She looked at him, her eyes tired, faint rings of dark shadow beneath them. Her hand shook slightly as she lifted her coffee mug. She smiled politely, but it was a fragile smile, forced and fleeting. She insisted she was fine. She insisted she was adjusting to life on the ranch. But he could see through it. There was a story behind the screams, he was certain, and it was not one she could share easily. His gut told him she had been through something painful, something that left deep scars. He had encountered grief and loss in his life, seen families torn apart, seen hardship in the eyes of those who carried it silently. But this was different. This was invisible. The pain she carried was not in plain sight. It was hidden in her cries, in the way her body tensed at night, in the way she avoided talking about the past. That evening, he made a choice. He would no longer pretend the situation was normal. He stayed awake, doing his usual rounds, checking the barns, making sure the fences were secure and the animals were settled. He approached the guest house slowly, each step careful and deliberate. The night was calm, still, and the moonlight stretched across the fields like silver water. He could hear the first scream from a distance. The sound was sharp and piercing, cutting through the night as though demanding attention. Second scream. His mind raced. He wanted to knock on the door to check if she was okay, but he feared interrupting something he did not understand. Still, he could not stand by and do nothing. The screams were more than noise. They were a signal, a call for help that no one else seemed willing or able to hear. Third scream. He stepped closer, cautious, unsure if approaching would help or hurt. He noticed the small details, the faint light spilling from the guest house windows, the shadows shifting as if moved by an unseen force, the silence between the screams that made the air feel heavier. He wondered if the land itself seemed to respond to the pain, if the wind, the rustling trees, and the distant hoot of an owl were all part of some silent rhythm he could not yet understand. Fourth scream. His hand hovered near the door, almost touching it, but he hesitated. What if he was too late? What if he interfered in something private, something she needed to experience alone? He realized that helping someone in pain sometimes required patience more than action, presence more than interference. Fifth scream, then silence. The absence of sound was deafening, almost more frightening than the screams themselves. He stepped back slowly, walking across the quiet fields under the moonlight, each step careful so as not to disturb the stillness. He returned to his home, mind heavy with thoughts. There was no explanation for what he had just witnessed. There were no clear instructions on what to do next. Only one certainty remained. Ignoring the situation was no longer an option. The following days were tense and filled with unspoken questions. The rancher watched her closely during the day, noting her behavior, the way she moved, the subtle expressions on her face. She carried herself politely, but there was a shadow in her eyes, a quiet fatigue that could not be hidden. He noticed the tremor in her hands, the hesitation in her voice when she answered routine questions, and the small sighs that escaped her lips as if carrying the weight of memories she could not share. Every detail confirmed what he already suspected. The woman's pain was real, and it went far beyond ordinary worry or fear. Even the animals seemed affected. The horses, usually calm and steady, grew restless in the evenings. They shifted in their stalls, stomped their hooves, and neighed softly as if sensing the tension in the air. The dogs, normally playful and obedient, paced and whimpered, their eyes following every movement, alert to some unseen disturbance. The rancher understood that animals can sense more than humans realize, and their behavior confirmed the gravity of the situation. Whatever she was experiencing at night was significant, and it affected everything around her. Despite all this, he knew that confrontation needed to be gentle. He could not force her to speak, and he could not impose solutions she might not be ready to accept. So he waited, watching and listening, giving her space while remaining vigilant. His mind replayed the screams, trying to interpret them, searching for patterns, listening for clues. Each night he stayed awake, ready to respond if necessary, but careful not to intrude in ways that might push her further into fear or isolation. During the days, he subtly attempted to build trust. He shared small conversations with her, simple observations about the land, the animals, and the weather. He offered small gestures of kindness, a cup of fresh coffee in the morning, a warm blanket left outside her door, a quiet word of encouragement when he passed by. He did not ask about the screams, at least not directly. He simply reminded her that she was not alone, that someone on the ranch cared enough to notice, that someone was willing to stay, even when the nights were hard. The woman seemed to notice these gestures. At first her responses were polite but distant, but gradually she began to relax slightly, her smiles becoming a little more genuine, her eyes less guarded, her movements less tense. The rancher realized that healing does not happen in a single night. It is slow, gradual, often imperceptible, and it requires patience. He also realized that his presence, his willingness to endure the discomfort of the screaming nights, might be the first step in helping her reclaim some sense of safety. By the second week, the whispers among the ranch hands had grown louder. Some still speculated about ghosts or curses. Others worried about the woman's mental health. The rancher remained silent in response. He understood that fear thrives in silence and gossip. He did not want to add to it. He only wanted to focus on what he could control, being present, observing, and offering quiet support. One evening, as he walked past the guest house, he noticed a light flickering inside. Curious but cautious, he paused to watch. The first scream shattered the night air, and he stepped closer, listening to the pain, the urgency, the raw emotion. He wondered what memories haunted her so deeply that they could manifest with such intensity, that they could dominate her nights and disturb the ranch's peace. He did not know the answer, but he felt the weight of her suffering pressing down on him. That night, as he returned to his own home, he realized that the situation was no longer just about curiosity or concern. It was about responsibility. He could not leave her to face these screams alone. He could not allow fear, speculation, or hesitation to prevent him from helping. He did not yet know how, and he did not yet know what it would take. But he understood one thing with clarity. She needed someone who would not turn away. And for the first time, the rancher acknowledged to himself that he might be that person. He did not yet know what the coming nights would bring. He did not yet know the full story of her past, the depth of her pain, or the way the screams were tied to memories she could not escape. But he knew that something significant was unfolding, something that would change both of their lives. The ranch, once peaceful and simple, had been transformed. Nightfall no longer brought quiet and rest. It brought questions, mysteries, and the urgent cries of someone in pain. And the rancher, despite the fear, despite the uncertainty, realized that ignoring it was no longer an option. From that night forward, he decided he would watch, he would wait, and he would be ready. Because the screams were not just sounds in the dark, they were a story, a life reaching out, and someone needed to answer. The next evening, the rancher made a decision he had been thinking about for days. He could no longer simply watch from a distance, listening to her screams and feeling helpless. Something inside him told him that she was not just crying out of fear or loneliness. These screams were tied to something deeper, something in her past that had left marks no one could see. He knew he had to act carefully. He had to approach her with patience, understanding, and kindness, because any wrong step could make her retreat further into her pain. He waited until the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange, pink, and purple. The air grew cooler, and the soft rustling of leaves created a rhythm that was almost hypnotic. He had done his rounds already, checking the fences, ensuring the animals were calm, and making sure the barns were secure. Now, he focused on the guest house, standing a short distance away, listening. The first scream split the night air, sharp and urgent. He took a deep breath and stepped closer. Second scream. He paused, steadying himself. He reminded himself that this was not about force or authority. This was about trust. He did not want to intimidate her or make her feel cornered. He wanted her to know that she was not alone, that someone cared enough to stay when the darkness came. He approached the door slowly, hand hovering just above the handle, heart beating fast. Bird scream. A soft, uncertain sound, not demanding entry but simply announcing his presence. He waited. There was silence. Then the door creaked open just a little. She peeked out, her face pale and weary. Her eyes widened, a flicker of fear crossing her expression before she quickly masked it with a polite smile. The rancher held his hands up slightly, showing that he meant no harm. "Good evening," he said softly. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." I wanted to check if you're okay." She said nothing at first, just looked at him with a mixture of caution and exhaustion. He noticed the way her shoulders trembled slightly, the subtle quiver in her hands. He realized that her pain was far deeper than he had imagined. She was carrying a burden that could not be lifted easily. And yet, she had come to this quiet place hoping to find peace. He respected that. He wanted to help her find it without forcing her to reveal anything she was not ready to share. Fourth scream echoed faintly from inside the house. He flinched slightly, but he did not step back. He stayed calm, steady, patient. "You don't have to carry it alone," he said gently. "Whatever is troubling you, you don't have to face it by yourself." For a long moment, she said nothing. The silence stretched between them like a fragile thread, and the rancher wondered if he had overstepped. But then, slowly, she lowered her eyes and let out a soft sigh. It was not a scream this time. It was a quiet, trembling sound, a release she had held inside for far too long. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't want anyone to hear. I thought if I came here, maybe I could forget. Maybe I could escape it. But it comes every night. I can't stop it. He nodded, listening carefully, giving her the space to continue. He did not interrupt. He did not judge. He simply let her speak. I survived something terrible, she said, her voice shaking. Something I can't erase from my mind. Every night, it comes back. I hear it, I feel it, I relive it, and I scream. I scream 5 times. I can't help it. I don't want to wake anyone. I don't want anyone to know. But it comes anyway. The rancher's heart ached for her. He had seen grief before. He had seen people hurt, lost, and broken. But this was different. This was invisible pain. Pain that was carried silently. Pain that could not be explained to anyone who had not experienced it. He understood deep down that this was not about weakness. It was about survival. She had survived something most people could not even imagine. And now, every night, she relived the trauma she had endured, unable to escape the memories that haunted her. He took a careful step forward, keeping his voice calm and reassuring. I can't imagine what you've been through, he said. I don't know the details, and I don't need to. But I do know this. You're not alone anymore. If you want, I can stay. I don't have to say anything. I don't have to do anything. I can just be here so that you know someone is with you. She looked at him then, really looked at him, as if seeing him for the first time. Her eyes were wet with unshed tears, reflecting the moonlight that spilled through the windows. She hesitated and slowly nodded. She stepped aside slightly, inviting him to sit on the porch. The rancher accepted, careful not to crowd her space. They sat together in silence, listening to the wind rustling through the trees, to the soft distant sounds of animals settling down for the night. It was peaceful, yet tense, a quiet understanding forming between them without words. I don't know why it always comes at the same time, she said quietly. I've tried everything. Sleeping earlier, staying busy, talking to people. Nothing works. The memories, they just return. And the screams follow. 5 times. Always 5 times. I can't stop him. He nodded again, not offering empty words or advice, but simply acknowledging her pain. Sometimes, he said slowly, the mind and heart have ways of holding on to things that the body cannot release. It doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're human. And the first step toward healing, sometimes, is just having someone who will stay. The conversation stretched on in quiet, gentle moments. The rancher noticed the gradual change in her posture, the slight easing of tension in her shoulders. She was beginning to trust him, beginning to see that he was not going to judge, and that he was not going to leave. The night continued, the stars bright above them, the cool breeze whispering through the fields, and for the first time in many nights she did not scream. The rancher knew this was only the beginning. The trauma she carried was deep, and the road ahead would be long and difficult. But he also knew that this moment, this fragile connection, this trust, was the first step towards something better. Healing did not happen all at once, and it did not happen overnight. But it could begin with a single gesture of understanding, with a single night of quiet support. In the following days, the rancher continued his gentle approach. He did not push for explanations, and he did not demand change. Instead, he offered his presence, small gestures of care, and a listening ear. The woman responded in kind, slowly opening up in ways that were subtle but meaningful. She smiled more genuinely during the day. She laughed softly at small jokes. She moved with a little more ease as she performed her chores. The nights remained difficult. The screams did not disappear entirely, but they grew weaker. Each night, the rancher would sit quietly nearby, never forcing the issue, never interrupting unnecessarily. He would listen, offering reassurance through his calm presence. And over time, the screams became less about reliving trauma and more about releasing it safely, with someone to witness, someone who cared. He also noticed something remarkable. The woman began to notice her surroundings differently. She would pause to watch the sunset, marveling at the colors stretching across the sky. She began talking to the animals more freely, feeding the horses with care, whispering to the dogs in the quiet moments of the evening. Life on the ranch, once simply a routine, became a source of subtle joy and comfort. The rancher realized that helping someone through trauma was not about fixing them or making the pain disappear instantly. It was about being patient, being present, and providing a safe space where they could slowly reclaim their life. Every small smile, every quiet word, Every moment of trust was a victory in itself. One night, after weeks of sitting quietly together, the rancher noticed something that filled him with hope. As the first scream approached, she took a deep breath and braced herself. The sound came, sharp and urgent as always, but then, instead of a second scream, she paused, steadying herself. The third, fourth, and fifth cries were softer, almost whispered. When the night ended, she looked at him with gratitude in her eyes, and he knew that progress, however small, was being made. The rancher smiled quietly to himself. He understood that the road ahead would still have challenges. There would be nights when the screams returned in full strength, when the memories would feel overwhelming. But he also understood that he had made a difference. He had shown her that someone could stay, that someone could care, that she did not have to face her pain alone. And in that quiet moment, under the stars, with the ranch silent except for the soft breathing of animals and the rustling of leaves, he knew that change had begun. Not dramatic or sudden, but steady, patient, and real. For the first time in many nights, the ranch was no longer just a place of work and routine. It had become a place of understanding, of healing, and of hope. And for the woman, it was the first night she felt that maybe, just maybe, she could find peace again. That night, the rancher made a choice he had been thinking about for days. He could no longer simply observe from a distance. Listening to the woman scream every night, watching her carry the weight of memories no one else could see, had reached a point where he knew he had to do more. It was not enough to offer quiet support from afar. She needed something different, something more personal, more present. He knew it was risky. Some might not understand, some might even call him foolish. But he also knew that helping her, truly helping her, required courage, patience, and a willingness to do the unthinkable. The sun had long set, leaving the ranch bathed in the soft glow of moonlight. Shadows stretched across the pastures, and the cool night air whispered through the trees. The animals were settled in their barns, the crickets sang in the fields, and the world outside the ranch seemed calm. Yet inside the guest house, tension simmered, ready to erupt as it did every night. The rancher walked slowly toward the small building, each step deliberate, steady, and cautious. He carried no tools, no authority, no intentions to confront, only presence. The first scream tore through the night. It was sharp, urgent, and full of pain, just as it had been for weeks. He stopped in the grass outside the porch, heart pounding. He did not run. He did not turn away. He stood there, calm and ready, giving her a silent signal that someone was near. Second scream. He spoke softly through the door, his voice gentle, calm, and careful. "It's okay. I'm here. You're safe." Third scream. He felt her trembling inside. He could hear the fear and the pain, but he also noticed something new. A slight hesitation in her voice, a small pause that had not been there before. It was as if she were beginning to notice that someone cared enough to stay. Fourth scream. He spoke again, gently reminding her of the small things around them. The moon shining over the pasture, the trees swaying in the cool wind, the distant lights of the barn. He did not try to fix her pain. He did not try to explain it away. He only guided her attention to the present moment, a moment where she could feel some grounding, some connection to the safety around her. Fifth scream. The night fell into silence. He remained where he was, not moving, not leaving, just sitting quietly near the porch. He understood that patience was crucial. For her, every scream was a release, a way to express something too heavy to carry silently. For him, staying meant showing her that someone could face her pain without fear, without judgment, without turning away. The next night he did the same, and the night after that. He did not force conversation. He did not pressure her. He simply stayed. His quiet presence became a steady rhythm, a constant that she could rely on even when the screams came. Slowly, the tension in the nights began to shift. The screams did not vanish, but they grew softer, less desperate, less sharp. During the day, he continued his gentle approach. He offered small gestures of kindness, a warm cup of tea left on the porch, a quiet word of encouragement while passing by, a soft smile when she looked weary. He never asked about the past, never pressured her to explain the screams. He simply reminded her that she was not alone, that someone was willing to stay when the nights were dark and the memories overwhelming. She began to respond in small ways. A smile lingered longer, a laugh escaped more freely, a glance of trust met his eyes. She still carried the weight of her memories, but she began to feel that it was possible to share that weight, even silently. She began tending the animals more confidently, speaking more freely during the day, and moving through the ranch with a little more ease. Each small action was a sign of progress, a step toward healing. One night, after weeks of sitting quietly together, the rancher noticed something remarkable. The first scream came, sharp and urgent as always, but instead of immediately following with the second scream, she paused. Her breathing was heavy, uneven, but she did not continue. He spoke softly, reminding her she was safe, that he was there, that she was not alone. The second scream came, quieter, almost whispered. The third and fourth followed in the same way, each softer, each less urgent. By the fifth, she was trembling but silent, as if she had finally gained a small measure of control over the pain she carried. The rancher understood that this was a significant moment. She was learning that the darkness did not have to dominate her entirely, that someone could face it with her, that it was possible to survive it with support. He did not celebrate or make a show of it. He simply acknowledged the progress quietly, as a patient observer, allowing her to feel that she had achieved something on her own. The nights continued in this pattern. Sometimes the screams returned with more strength, sometimes they were faint whispers, but the constant presence of the rancher provided a steadying influence. She began to notice the world around her differently. The soft glow of moonlight, the subtle sounds of the wind, the comforting presence of the animals in their stalls. Life on the ranch, once simply a routine, became a source of stability and subtle joy. During the day, their relationship grew stronger, though it remained quiet and respectful. The rancher never pressed for explanations, never asked for confessions. He understood that healing was a gradual process, one that could not be rushed. Instead, he offered his presence, his understanding, and small gestures of support. Over time, she began to open up, sharing fragments of her past, not all at once, but in small moments of trust. She spoke of loss, of fear, of memories that had haunted her for years, and each time she spoke, the weight of her burden became just a little lighter. The rancher listened carefully. He did not judge. He did not interrupt. He simply offered understanding, patience, and empathy. He knew that this was the only way to help someone truly heal, to be present, to care, and to offer quiet support when the pain seemed overwhelming. Weeks passed and the nights continued, but slowly, imperceptibly, she began to regain a sense of control. The screams, once sharp and urgent, became less frequent, less intense. She learned to breathe through the fear, to anchor herself in the present, to release the pain with the knowledge that someone was there, not to fix it, but simply to witness it, to acknowledge it, and to care. The rancher realized that the unthinkable action he had taken, simply being there, sitting through the screams, offering quiet support, was transforming both their lives. She was beginning to reclaim her nights, to feel safe in the quiet darkness, to experience moments of peace that had seemed impossible before. And he too was changing. He had learned patience, empathy, and the quiet power of presence. He understood that sometimes helping someone meant standing beside them in silence, letting them face their pain with the knowledge that they were not alone. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields, the rancher sat quietly outside the guest house. The first scream came, as it always did. He stayed calm, steady, ready to offer support. But this time, something was different. She did not follow with the second scream immediately. She paused, taking a deep, steadying breath. The second scream was softer, the third almost a whisper, the fourth gentle, and by the fifth she was silent. She stepped outside, trembling slightly but standing. She looked at him, eyes filled with tears, but also with a quiet sense of accomplishment. For the first time in weeks, she had faced the night and survived it without being completely overwhelmed. The rancher smiled quietly to himself, understanding that this was only the beginning, but a meaningful beginning. The road ahead would still be difficult. The nights would still be challenging, but they were no longer hopeless. Together they were making progress, one night at a time. And in the quiet of that night, under the stars, with the ranch calm and peaceful except for the faint rustle of leaves and the distant sound of animals, both the rancher and the woman understood something important. Sometimes the unthinkable is simply choosing to stay when everything else seems impossible. Sometimes the most courageous act is standing beside someone in silence, offering patience, understanding, and unwavering presence. That night, the rancher remained outside, sitting quietly in his chair. The woman returned to the house for the evening, but she felt a small sense of relief and hope she had not felt in a long time. She was beginning to learn that the screams, though painful and difficult, did not have to control her life, and he knew that by simply staying, by being present, he had changed the course of her nights, her recovery, and perhaps even her life. The ranch had once been a place of routine, work, and silence. Now, it was also a place of healing, patience, and quiet understanding. And from that night forward, both of them would carry the knowledge that sometimes the most unthinkable actions, simply being there for someone in their darkest moments, can create the deepest change. Weeks passed since the rancher had begun sitting outside her guest house each night, quietly offering his presence while the woman faced her fears. The nights, once filled with sharp, piercing screams, had changed slowly but steadily. The screams had lost their urgency, their sharpness, their ability to dominate the night. She was learning to cope, to release her pain without allowing it to consume her entirely. And the rancher, quietly patient and steadfast, had become a steady anchor in her life, someone she could trust even without words. The ranch itself had begun to feel different. The horses, once restless in the evenings, now moved calmly in their stalls. The dogs slept soundly through the night, and the wind seemed gentler, carrying with it a quiet peace that had been missing for so long. Even the ranch hands noticed the change, though they did not know the reason. The whispers that had once spread about ghosts or terrible secrets had faded. The ranch, long haunted by tension and fear, was slowly returning to its natural rhythm. One night, the rancher sat in his chair as usual, waiting. The sky was clear, the moon bright and full, casting a silver glow over the fields. He had grown used to this routine, the first scream, the second, and then observing her responses, but tonight felt different. He sensed something in the air, a subtle shift that told him she had reached a turning point. The first scream came, sharp as ever, but the rancher remained calm. He watched quietly, waiting. This time, the second scream was softer, almost controlled. The third and fourth were even weaker, and by the fifth, silence had returned. He stayed in his chair, not moving, not speaking. The silence stretched for long moments, peaceful and steady, almost celebratory in its quietness. Then the door of the guest house opened slowly. She stepped outside, her face pale but calm, her eyes bright with tears, but not of fear. She looked at him, and for the first time in many weeks she smiled, a true smile, one that carried gratitude, relief, and the quiet confidence of someone who had survived the night. The rancher nodded gently, acknowledging her strength without making a show of it. No words were needed. They both knew that a significant change had taken place. The following nights continued to reinforce this transformation. There were occasional moments of tension, a soft cry or a whispered sigh, but nothing like the sharp, urgent screams of the past. She began to sleep for longer stretches, waking refreshed rather than drained. She spoke more during the day, sharing small stories, laughing softly, and gradually allowing herself to feel the comfort of the ranch's quiet nights. She began spending more time outdoors, watching the sun rise over the fields, enjoying the animals' company, and taking part in the chores with renewed energy. The rancher, in turn, observed these changes with quiet satisfaction. He did not claim credit, nor did he need to. The progress was hers, not his. His role was simply to stay, to be present, to offer steady support while she learned to navigate her memories and fears. And in seeing her regain control, he too felt a sense of renewal. The nights, once heavy with tension and dread, were now filled with hope, patience, and a fragile but growing sense of peace. One evening, as the sun began to set, she approached him quietly. "I would be so happy, thank you," she said softly, her voice carrying a depth of sincerity that warmed the rancher's heart. I don't know how to explain it, but having you here, it has helped. More than I can say." He shook his head gently. "You've done this yourself," he said. "I just stayed. You've found your strength. That's the important part." She nodded, looking at the fields around them. The wind blew softly, carrying the scents of grass, earth, and wildflowers. The animals moved quietly in the distance, calm and content. It was a simple, ordinary scene, but to both of them it felt extraordinary. The peace of the ranch, once broken by nightly screams and unseen pain, had been restored, carefully, gradually, and with quiet courage. In the following days, she began to take small steps toward rebuilding her life. She no longer feared the night. She spent time journaling her thoughts, walking in the fields, and talking to the rancher about mundane details of ranch life. Their bond grew stronger, built not on grand gestures but on steady presence, trust, and patience. The screams that had once dominated the nights had become rare, almost non-existent, as she learned to face her memories without being consumed by them. The rancher continued his routine, though he no longer needed to sit outside every night. He stayed nearby, checking on the animals, completing his work, and occasionally pausing to observe the guest house, smiling quietly at her progress. He understood that his role had shifted from active support during the worst moments to steady, quiet presence as she regained her confidence and strength. One particularly quiet night, she approached him as he sat outside, watching the stars. The moon was full, illuminating the fields in a silver glow. She stood there, hesitant but determined, and said, I think I can sleep through the night now, without fear, without screaming." He nodded, smiling gently. "You've earned that," he said. "You've worked through something very difficult, and you did it. The nights are yours again." The sense of accomplishment in her eyes was unmistakable. She had faced the darkness, endured it, and come out stronger. For the first time in many weeks, she could truly rest. The ranch, too, seemed to breathe easier, no longer heavy with tension, but light with calm and quiet life. The next morning she woke refreshed, smiling as she stepped outside to greet the rancher and the animals. She moved with a sense of ease, no longer weighed down by the fear that had once dominated her nights. The rancher noticed the change immediately, the way she carried herself, the brightness in her eyes, the subtle confidence in her steps. He felt a quiet pride, not in himself, but in the courage and strength she had shown. Days turned into weeks, and the nights remained peaceful. The screams, once so regular and piercing, were gone. She had reclaimed her nights, one quiet step at a time. The rancher continued his work maintaining the property and tending to the animals, but the atmosphere had shifted entirely. Where there had once been tension, there was calm. Where there had been fear, there was hope. And where there had been pain, there was healing. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields, she came to the porch where the rancher sat quietly. "I feel safe now," she said softly. "I can sleep. I can breathe. I can finally feel normal again." He nodded, understanding the depth of what she had just said. "You've done this yourself," he replied. "I only stayed. You've faced the darkness and reclaimed your nights. That's what matters." She smiled, a true, genuine smile, and for the first time there was no trace of fear or uncertainty. She had survived the nights, she had faced her memories, and she had emerged stronger, more confident, and finally, at peace. The rancher watched her, quietly proud, knowing that his simple act of presence had made a difference. But he also knew that the real courage belonged to her. The courage to face the pain, to endure the nights, and to slowly reclaim control over her life. From that night forward, the ranch returned to its natural rhythm. The animals thrived, the fields were calm, and the quiet nights were once again peaceful. The woman continued her work on the ranch, confident and strong, no longer haunted by nightly screams, and the rancher continued his work, content in the knowledge that sometimes the unthinkable action, simply staying, simply being present, simply caring without judgment, can change lives in ways that are profound and lasting. The story of those nights, the screams, and the quiet courage that followed became a private memory between them, a reminder of how resilience, patience, and understanding can transform the darkest moments into a path toward healing. The ranch had once been a place of ordinary life, routine, and quiet work. Now it was a place of quiet triumph, resilience, and hope. The woman, finally free from the grip of her painful memories, walked through the fields, tending the animals, feeling the wind on her face, and watching the sun rise over the horizon. She felt safe, strong, and alive. And the rancher, sitting nearby and observing quietly, understood the true meaning of courage, patience, and presence. In the end, it was not a dramatic rescue, not a sudden solution, and not a heroic gesture in the usual sense. It was something far more profound. It was human, simple, patient, and enduring. Someone had stayed when it was hard. Someone had cared when it would have been easy to turn away. And because of that, healing had begun, and had prevailed. The ranch, bathed in morning light, stretched peacefully across the horizon. The woman and the rancher, each changed in quiet ways by those nights of pain and perseverance, continued their work together. The screams were gone, the nights were calm, and for the first time in years, peace had returned. It was a victory born not of grand gestures, but of quiet courage, steady presence, and human empathy, the unthinkable choice that had made all the difference.